In this video, we're going to be discussing the multi-state performance test, or the MPT. And more specifically, we're going to be discussing the basic structure of the most highly tested tasks that we see on this portion of your uniform bar exam. So one thing to keep in mind is that the MPT, in large part, is testing your ability to follow instructions, and additionally, it's testing your ability to complete the assigned task within the allocated time. This means that when the graders are grading your final MPT, your MPT should look somewhat like the real thing. So what I mean by that is if you've been assigned a brief, your work product should look similar to what a brief would look like in real life. Or if you've been assigned to write a letter or a memo, those two should look somewhat similar to what they would look like in real life if you were drafting these for your boss or for a client. So the purpose of this video is to give you some guidance on the structure to these highly tested tasks. And we urge you to memorize these formats. This is definitely in your best interest because while some MPTs are going to give you additional formatting instructions, when the examiners do not give you this type of additional information, they're going to expect that you know how to format these types of tasks. So it's good to memorize these formats, and then that way you can use them as a default in the event you're not given extra guidance. So we're going to go over each type of highly tested task and discuss the basic formatting or structure of each. We have a nice little one sheet that you can download if you want to see all of these types of formats in literally one sheet. So however you prefer to review these, that is up to you. So the first task that we come to is a persuasive brief. And we have this nice little reminder here that sometimes with persuasive brief MPTs, the examiners give us extra formatting guidance. So remember, these formats that we're discussing here are your defaults. These are what you should use in the event you're not given guidance. So if you have an MPT that gives you instructions about how they want to see your MPT formatted, just follow their instructions. Because remember, a large part of this portion of your bar exam is testing your ability to follow instructions. So assuming you don't have any additional guidance and you're supposed to be writing a persuasive brief, the best place to start is with drafting a caption. And sometimes in your file, they're going to give you a motion or the opposing party's motion in brief for you to look at. That's a great place to start. Use that as your springboard. So flip through your file, see if that exists, and if it does, just copy off of it. The only thing that you would be changing is the name or the title of your brief. But in the event you don't have some sort of brief or motion to copy off of, again, this is what your default formatting would look like. So for instance, usually you are in the state of Franklin on the MPT. So you would write state of Franklin or whatever state you're in, district court for the city of or for the county of. It just depends upon your fact pattern. You'll insert whatever is applicable. Then next up on your caption is always the plaintiff's name, followed by the actual word plaintiff, versus defendant, always followed by that actual word defendant. And then will come the title of your brief. So the brief in support of, and then insert whatever it is called. You'll have this information in your task memo because they'll tell you what type of brief you're drafting. Additionally, I called this your caption. This is going to go at the very beginning of your brief. And please be sure to not actually write this word caption. We just put this here for you so that you knew it was the caption. So once you have the caption done, what does the actual persuasive brief look like? Well, it has 4 basic parts. Remember that these MPTs, the memos and the briefs, for instance, are not going to be formatted identically to those assignments that you had back in your legal research and writing class. Those types of memos and briefs had more parts because they were not timed assignments, where here, of course, you are working within a limited time frame. So here are the basic components of your brief is the statement of your case, your statement of facts, your legal argument, and your conclusion. Many times the instructions provided on the MPT will tell you to only draft your argument. So again, following instructions is really important. This way you're not wasting time drafting something that they can't give you points for. And of course, if you do something they tell you not to do, that's going to be very obvious that you're not, in fact, following instructions. But in the event they do not tell you to only draft the legal argument, that means they are expecting you're going to have these other components of your brief present. So that first component is your statement of the case. Here you're identifying the parties in your lawsuit, the nature of the case. So for instance, is this a motion for preliminary injunction? Is this a motion to compel discovery? You're going to want to outline that. You want to get specific about the issue that's in dispute. Also discuss the procedural posture of the case if that is relevant. So for instance, are you on appeal? Has discovery been completed? Are you at the very beginning of discovery? Again, you'll have this information provided to you in your file. And then the last thing you want to make sure you touch upon in your statement of the case section is your requested relief. So for instance, if you are drafting a motion to dismiss and the brief in support, of course you want the court to grant that. You're going to want to reiterate that here in the statement of your case. I always like to think of the statement of the case as kind of like a little mini summary about who are the parties and what is going on and what do you want, essentially. You can draft this last. You'll have a better feel for not only the law, but your file as well if you draft your legal argument first. And drafting this later will probably make it go more quickly rather than you struggling with grappling with the facts at the beginning. The next section here is your statement of facts. Again, you're not including this unless you're told specifically to do so. This is about 6 to 7 sentences, give or take a little bit, using, again, the facts provided to you in your task memo and file. It's also helpful for you to draft this after your legal argument if this is something you're expected to do, because this way you'll have a better feel for the facts, and more importantly, you'll have a better feel for those facts that are important, that you should actually be discussing. Next comes your legal argument, which you're always going to have. This is a component of the MPT. If they're asking you to draft a persuasive brief, you'll definitely have to draft this. So for each issue, you should be separating these out by separate headings. And these need to be strong headings. And by that, I mean you need to craft a heading that applies the law to the facts, and they need to be in a complete sentence. You want to draw positive attention to these so that it jumps off the page to the grader. So make sure you're doing that by bolding and or underlining these headings. Now, after you've crafted your headings or under each heading, you're going to be following the rule, analysis, conclusion format to a basic degree. So that means as you're extracting the rules from your library, those rules are going to fall under each heading. Then you'll have an analysis section where you are applying the facts to the rules. One thing to keep in mind, I know this throws a lot of examinees off, is that not every issue is going to be analyzed in the exact same depth as the other. So for instance, you might have 4 cases and 3 of the cases are dealing with 2 issues, but only 1 case speaks to the final issue. So that means your final issue is going to be a little bit shorter because there's simply less to say. And that's okay. Not everything is treated equally on the MPT, just like in real life. Make sure you're not ignoring bad law. So in your legal argument section, you want to make sure you're distinguishing the law that hurts your client's position. Remember, your job is to be persuasive, so you want to use persuasive language. You're trying to show that judge that yes, there is law out there that contradicts our position, but you essentially want to show how your position is different and how that's not actually impacting your client's case. And as I've already mentioned, use that persuasive language and then write this section first. The other sections will be much more easier for you to complete once you've done that. And then finally comes your conclusion section. This is where you simply summarize that legal argument above and you're reinforcing those conclusions that you reached. This is pretty short and sweet, about 3 to 4 sentences in total. This is where you essentially are reiterating what you want the court to do. The last thing I'll say about your brief is you want to include these headings. So truly, you want to write Roman numeral 1, statement of the case. and then your statement of the case is going to come under it. And then you'll have Roman numeral 2, statement of facts, and you'll have your statement of facts that come under it. You'll have Roman numeral 3, your legal argument with all of your headings and your rules and your analysis and your conclusions. And then you'll have that Roman numeral 4 for your conclusion. So you do want to include those headings. Let's hop over to our next highly tested task, objective memos. So you always want to make your memo look like the real thing. So you want to write memorandum or memo. I recommend you bold it. This way it is very clear to the grader that you've included this portion organizationally. Then you're going to kind of have your memo caption, so to speak. This is your to, from, re, and date. Make sure you do not actually write your name. I know sometimes that's your knee-jerk reaction is to insert your name on the from line, but remember, we're not supposed to be identifying you on the bar exam. So make sure you address this and essentially sign it or write who it's from based upon what the task memo tells you to do. So the basic components of your memo is going to be the introduction section, your statement of facts, your discussion, and your conclusion. And much like the brief, you should include these headings. So you should actually type out Roman numeral 1, introduction, and then your introduction will follow. Roman numeral 2, statement of facts. Your statement of facts will follow. Roman numeral 3, your discussion. This is kind of like the meat and potatoes of this task. It's going to be the longest. It's the most important. It's going to get you the most points. Your discussion will follow under that heading. And then finally, you'll have that heading of your conclusion. So circling back up to that introduction, this is where you essentially want to summarize the purpose of the memo and or the task, and you're also going to want to present your conclusion. So what you can do when you're practicing MPTs is this is something that will be kind of half done until you're done getting through the library and actually crafting the discussion, because you have to conclude the issue, or you should be concluding the issue here in your intro. As for the statement of facts, this is not always a necessary component of the task. So again, make sure you're following the instructions presented. If you're supposed to be including a statement of facts, this is where you're summarizing those relevant or pertinent facts. I would do this after you craft your discussion section, because this way you'll have a better feel for those facts that are important and you'll be able to do this more quickly. Now, your discussion section is definitely something that they're expecting you to write. Again, as I already mentioned, this is where you're going to get the majority of your points. This is what they're looking for, because here in your discussion section is where you're articulating the applicable rules and you're analyzing them to reach your conclusions. So for each separate issue, you want to have separate headings. Draw positive attention to these headings, so you want to bold them and or underline them. Here, your headings do not have to be in complete sentences. We recommend your headings in a persuasive brief are, but here in a memo, they don't have to be. After each heading, you want to make sure you're following that rule analysis conclusion format. So again, you're going to be extracting the rules from your library, crafting that rule paragraph, then you'll go on to analyze those relevant facts and reach a conclusion for those issues. I already mentioned this, but make sure you draft this section first. I promise it will make the remaining sections go a little bit smoother and quicker. One other final tip for you all is oftentimes in your discussion section, it's helpful to have like a roadmap paragraph where you discuss the law. And oftentimes it's most helpful if you discuss the broadest piece of applicable law and then you work your way down to the most narrow piece. The most narrow piece usually being what is at issue and what the rest of your discussion section is going to be addressing and analyzing. I call it a roadmap paragraph because this means if you were the reader of this task or of this memo, it's going to paint a really nice picture about where the rest of that discussion section is taking you and what it will be, in fact, discussing. And then your conclusion section does just that. It's again short and sweet. You're simply summarizing the discussion section above and your findings. It is going to be just a few sentences. Now, letters are also categorized as highly tested. There are two types of letters that we see the examiners write MPTs on, specifically demand letters and opinion letters. So here we're looking at a demand letter first. However, you'll notice once we get through this and then go through the opinion letter that they're pretty similar in terms of their basic formatting. So that's kind of nice. If you're familiar with the formatting of one, it does translate pretty well to the other type of task. So here for your demand letter, just like any other letter, you want a caption. Again, don't write this word caption because that looks funny. Think about it. If you've ever read a letter or written a letter, you don't write the word caption. This is just the relevant information that they're expecting to see. So what they want to see here in your caption is the date. And then you want to identify who is writing the letter. It's usually coming from a law firm. So you would insert the law firm name and their applicable address, which would be available to you in your file. Then you need to articulate where it's going. Who is this letter being sent to? So you'll have the recipient's information next. Then you'll space and you'll have a line regarding what this letter is about. And then will come your dear line. So again, here you're addressing whomever you're actually sending this to. This should take you just a second, and this should be all done very quickly based upon the information in your file, and sometimes even simply the task memo has all of this information. So the main components of a demand letter is your introduction section, the body of your letter, which is the most important part. It's essentially, again, like the meat and potatoes. This is where you're going to get all of your points. And then you'll have that conclusion and closing sections. Here in a letter, we do not think you should include these headings. So we've just put them here for you as like a visual guidance or as like a placeholder. But again, if you've ever read a letter or drafted a letter in real life, you're not including these types of headings. Again, you want your letter to follow this format, but those headings shouldn't be there. So in your introduction section, this is short. It's just opening up, telling the reader what is the purpose of the letter and some basic information about the sender. We recommend you write this last, and oftentimes your task memo is going to provide you great guidance for this. So for instance, if you're writing a demand letter to opposing counsel or to the opposing party, here you're going to basically be identifying yourself as a lawyer for the other side and why you're writing them this letter. The body is the most important. So here for all of the separate issues that you may be addressing in the body section, you can use headings. So while you're not going to use a heading that says body, it is okay if you want to use headings within the body. And in fact, we recommend you do this. It's helpful for the reader, hence the grader, to see that you've identified and addressed everything you're supposed to be discussing. So you can draw positive attention to these headings, bold them, underline them. They don't have to be complete sentences. They can be simply a word or a phrase, for instance. Remember that you're writing a demand letter, so your tone matters. Much like with the persuasive brief, your job is to be just that, persuasive. You're trying to convince the reader to do what you want. For instance, in a brief, you're trying to convince the judge to do what you want. Here in your demand letter, you're trying to convince that recipient to do what you want. Again, usually the opposing party, or it's usually opposing counsel. So there's that fine line between being persuasive and trying to get what you want. You're not being confrontational. Under each of your headings for these different issues that you're addressing in your body, you're going to follow IRAC. So under each heading, we'll follow your rule paragraph, then your analysis, and then your conclusion. If you have like terms of art or buzzwords that are not within common usage amongst regular people, make sure you are defining or explaining these necessary legal issues and concepts so that it is easy for the reader to understand what you're discussing. And much like the other tasks, you don't want to ignore bad law. So if there is law out there or provided to you in your library that hurts your client's position, don't ignore it. They're expecting you address it and that you explain why it doesn't apply to your situation. That's what we mean when we say distinguish. Next is your conclusion. This is where you get real specific. This is where you suggest your recipient do what you want. This is, again, kind of like outlining your demand. This is pretty short and sweet, 3 to 4 sentences in total. And then your closing is basically where you sign your letter. Make sure you're following instructions. Read that task memo again to figure out who you're supposed to be. So for instance, if you're writing a letter on behalf of a law firm for your client and they tell you that you're the managing partner, or that you're drafting a letter for the managing partner to sign, then you want to format it accordingly. So that's your little example here. Moving on to our opinion letter, they look pretty similar as I mentioned. So if you memorize the format of a letter generally, it's going to really help you out here. So much like I said before is the caption, I'm not going to go back over that because I already did. And then you'll notice here for your opinion letter, you have that intro, you have that statement of facts, a body, a conclusion, and a closing. So it looks pretty similar. We've already discussed what the intro is for. But what I haven't mentioned is the main difference between a demand letter and opinion letter. Usually a demand letter is being sent to opposing counsel or the other side, and you're trying to explain why they should do what you want them to do. That's why you're being persuasive. Here in an opinion letter, you're usually drafting a letter to your client. Usually your client has asked you a question. They want some sort of explanation on the law or their position in some sort of legal issue, and your job is to explain to them your opinion about what they should do. That's why we're calling it an opinion letter. So in your intro, again, you're explaining the purpose of the letter and basic information about you. Write this last. Next up is your statement of facts. Don't include this unless you're told to do so. So again, remember you want to follow instructions. If this is something they ask you to include, write it last. This is where you're going to summarize those pertinent or relevant facts. For the body, you're going to do the exact same thing as you did for a demand letter. You want headings. Those headings should be bolded and or underlined, and you're going to follow IRAC under each. So you're going to have a rule paragraph, then you'll have your analysis and conclusion. You should be answering the questions posed in the task memo. That is what you are attempting to do and accomplish in the body here. The conclusion section is where you're going to conclude on those questions or issues presented and suggest any further action. So again, if you're drafting this to your client, this is where you're basically telling your client what to do or what they should do next. This is short and sweet, about 3 to 4 sentences in total. And then again, your closing section, this is where you sign your letter. So be sure to double check what your task memo says to do or who you are supposed to be or who you're drafting this letter for. And then make sure you set up your closing signature block to reflect that. So now we've covered the most highly tested MPT tasks and how to format them. Again, the purpose of this is to help give you some guidance about those default formats. This way you can make sure while you're practicing MPTs and of course on exam day that your final task looks as it's supposed to.